Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Clay, and today I'm going to talk about The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene. So I recently read this book, and I thought it was really interesting, and I think there's a bunch of things that we can learn here. So in the book, he basically creates these different personas, these different types of seducers. And the idea is that all of us will have, one or two of these personas within us. And I think also we will be attracted to a certain persona as well. It's like the person that we could fall victim to. So I think it's really interesting to know both those things about ourselves. How can we be more seductive? But how can we also kind of be on the lookout for people who are trying to seduce us, maybe in a manipulative way? So right off the bat, I just want to mention, this isn't just about sexual seduction, although of course it can be used that way. But, I think our entire lives require some level of seduction. We're trying to make friends. We're trying to get jobs. We're trying to succeed in various types of environments. Maybe you need to convince people of things now and then. Maybe you want people to like you so that you can, do certain things, or maybe you just want to get more connection in your life. All of these things require some level of seduction. So in the book, he has this concept of an anti-seducer or an anti-seducer, depending on how you pronounce that. This is a person who repels people rather than attracts them. And he creates various personas of that as well. And he says that all of us, have maybe a little bit of one or two of these anti-seducers. And, it's our job to see that, recognize that, and try to root that from our lives if we want to be attractive to other people. So if this topic interests you and you want to learn a little bit more about yourself, maybe learn how to be a little bit more seductive, stick around. I'm going to go through the various seducer types and then talk a little bit about the anti-seductor. So the first type of seducer that he talks about is the siren. And this is probably that classical seductive energy that you might think of when you think of a seducer. So, modeled after the sirens of the sea, these are these like creatures that would lure the sailors to their deaths, right? The siren has this sort of dark, mysterious, and very intense seductive energy that almost radiates off this person. There's almost this element of danger behind it, and almost this feeling like, if you go with them, maybe it'll be your ruin. And he talks about in the book that it's often like rational types of people that kind of fall victim to this. It's like they can like give up their rationality for a minute and almost fall into this, this seductive energy. And so there is this sort of underlying sexual piece to it, but it's not like an overt sexuality. It's under the surface and almost this energy that they emit. He says also that it's not necessarily about physical beauty, although obviously all of these seducers run on some level of physicality. However, he says in the book that the most famous seducer of all time was Cleopatra. And apparently Cleopatra was, attractive, but she wasn't like a 10 out of 10. But she used her art of seduction to kind of elevate herself. So it's one reason why I kind of like this concept is it's something you can learn, it's something you can develop, and it's not just about, being born attractive. I've done a lot of photography in my life and, various types of like fashion, a lot of model shoots. And one thing that I've realized from working with models is that how physically attractive they are, is important, obviously, in a model, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is their like this energy that they emit. And you might meet somebody that's sort of just like looks like an average person, but then when they get in front of the camera, they kind of come alive, and it's like they can sort of take on this persona and emit this kind of energy. For myself, when I read this persona of the siren, it was like immediately apparent to me that this is probably the type that attracts me the most. That element of danger, that element of mystery, and it's like this beautiful, dark, mysterious thing, right? And it kind of represents this loss of rationality. To me, I think generally I am a very rational person. Maybe not rational, but logical. I probably think a lot. And, it's that fall. It's like there's this risk. Yeah, it's almost like this feeling of, I really like this. I really want this, but it might destroy me. And, you know, it's perfect, like in the myths of the sailors. And, you know, they're literally going to their deaths, but these sirens are able to seduce them. So the next seducer is the rake, and it's kind of the masculine version of the siren. Robert Greene says it's more male and female, but I kind of wonder if it's more masculine and feminine, and maybe it is possible for different genders to kind of cross the lines into these different seducers here. But what characterizes the rake is this like intense drive towards women. And it's like one woman is never enough for the rake. It's like they're interested in all women. And it would be very hard for a rake to just settle down with one. Because I think at the core, what does the rake want? The rake enjoys the conquest of conquering a woman. And the harder it is, like the more difficult it is to get a person, kind of the more interested they are. Like there's some stories in the book. That's one thing that Robert Greene's really great at, is telling really good stories to support his ideas. But, you know, there's these stories of these famous rakes, and they're like, there's this one guy who's like literally digging a tunnel in order to come up in this woman's house because her husband is so protective of her. And, you know, this famous rake, that's like the perfect challenge. I think what characterizes the rake is basically this intense interest in women. It's not just, I want to have sex with women. He's interested in all aspects. You know, he wants to get inside their head and find out what makes them tick, give them what they want, and sort of fulfill their fantasy in that way. And that's kind of what excites the rake, is creating this fantasy that kind of drives women wild. So obviously a long-term relationship with a rake might be difficult, right? They're probably the types that are gonna maybe cheat in a monogamous relationship, for example. Because I think at the end of the day, they're interested in that conquest and they like that. It's the excitement of that. So it's almost like a bit of a game to them. So the third type of seducer is the ideal lover. And this is that person that can figure out exactly what you want and then they give it to you. And, you know, there's a lot of people in life that are kind of going through life and it's like nobody really understands them. No one gets them. Maybe you have some special interests that just nobody else is really interested in, or like you like to talk about certain things, or maybe you're really romantic, or maybe you're really adventurous. The ideal lover will come along and find out exactly what it is that you want and then become that person. They become your ideal. And, you know, depending on what type of person you are and how often this happens, this can cause like a complete falling, right? You know, if you're a very romantic person and all of a sudden this person presents as the ultimate romantic partner, or like, let's say you're really adventurous and now there's this perfect adventurer that's just, you know, your ideal partner, right? So I think with all these seducers, right, it's like if you have something they want, they will use these techniques to get you. And of course, there are types that will use this in manipulative ways. Let's say you have like power or money or something that they need. Well, then they can use these to get this from you. But, you know, if they just genuinely like you as a person, then these people will use these seduction techniques to kind of fit into your situation. So the fourth type is the dandy. And this one is really interesting to me. I think it's a little bit complicated. I think a lot of people misunderstand really what's going on with the dandy. But the dandy is hard to categorize. It's this person who is just exceptionally free, and that freedom is something that is attractive. So many of us go through life and it's like we're trapped inside this system, all these societal rules and norms, and a lot of people just, it's like they want to break out of that, but they never are able to. Well, the dandy is a person who kind of represents the freedom from that system. It's a person who kind of spits in the face of a lot of that stuff. And they're kind of living their own life, doing their own thing. So often this expresses as a person who is just more fluid, more ambiguous. They don't fall into these perfect boxes. So sometimes this can be a person who is a little bit fluid between like, you know, gender norms. So a lot of them will kind of play with masculine and feminine energies. Right? Maybe you have men who could dress more flamboyantly. You know, they care about style, kind of like David Bowie-esque, right? That might be a dandy who focuses on that physical style aspect. But then on the female side, you might have women who behave more like men, right? Which would be like more rational. They would dress more that way. It's like they come across just more masculine in general. So the funny thing about the dandy, it's sort of like doing maybe the opposite of what people expect out of you. I think a lot of the times too, the dandies are kind of elusive. They might be there and then they're gone, right? I think a lot of these seduction types, it's sort of, there's an element of don't give people too much. Give people enough to be interested and then withdraw. I think a lot of people where they get confused with this male and female, masculine and feminine energies thing is they assume it's all about dress. So if you look up on YouTube about dandies, like there's this whole idea of it's just the way people dress, right? Oh, there's a dandy, you can tell by how they're dressing. But if you head back a few hundred years and you listen to the stories maybe that Robert Greene's telling about, the first dandies, it wasn't all about dress, although that was part of it, and it could be part of it, but it doesn't have to be, right? It was more about that disdain for being put inside a box, and it's these people who kind of want to fight back against the norms. So like a male dandy, they could look masculine or they could look feminine, but they could still look masculine while being very psychologically feminine. And I find that concept quite interesting because that's actually how I've always felt. I am a man, obviously. I can be quite masculine, but psychologically, and emotionally, I get along with women quite well. So, that aspect of that psychologically feminine kind of interests me a little bit. So on the flip side, female dandies might be psychologically masculine, which means being more rational. And as far as like personality types, like the 16 personality types, all the NF men are kind of a little more psychologically feminine, is sort of what I noticed. But then if you look at NT women, so there's all the NT types like INTJs and INTPs and ENTJs. These women might just be a little more masculine emotionally and psychologically. So this whole like psychologically feminine, psychologically masculine, Robert Greene says that this is actually very attractive. Let's say you're kind of this rough, gruff, rational man, right? And then maybe women kind of represent something that you don't completely understand. But now this very masculine woman comes along that is very rational. It can almost create this attraction because it's out of the box, it's something different, and you're like, wow, she's different. And just that ambiguity can create this allure and attraction. So the next type is the natural. And the natural is somebody who kind of embodies this like innocent, childlike energy that can be very attractive to certain types of people. So there might be this like spontaneous, innocent feel to this person, or like unpretentious and playful, kind of like how children are, but not obviously an actual child, but just taking those things that are attractive about children and then putting them in an adult. So in general, it's a person who has kind of managed to keep their like childlike wonder. It's this thing that we all wish we had. Like we look back on our childhoods and I mean, unless you had a really bad childhood, you might have this feeling like, there's this innocence, right, that you had and this playfulness. And there's, I think for myself, it's like this desire. I wish I could sometimes get back to that feeling, right? So when you see a natural, it's almost this like attractive, sentimental feeling. Like it's like, oh, I want that. I think for certain people too, why they're attracted to the natural is it creates this feeling like, oh, I need to protect that person. I need to help them. People that are naturals often end up with these partners who are these sort of helpers or like protectors, right? Especially like women who are naturals. Like I can think of one person I know that is definitely a natural. And the types of men that she ends up with often are these kind of tough, masculine, protective types. They're really handy, like they could build a house with their own hands, and they're kind of taking care of her. And so the natural kind of likes that, right? There's other seducer types that would just hate the idea of being taken care of. Along with this kind of innocent, authentic energy, it's almost this idea or feeling that this person needs help. Like it could be that type of person who's a little bit ditzy, and it's like, they're kind of cute in how they do that, and like they're like pick up the hammer and they're hitting the nail, and the man has to come and be like, that's not how you do it, I'll show you, or kind of that attitude. And so I think the thing about all these seducers is, Yeah, there's the seducer, but then there's also the person who's attracted to that seducer. I think that's sort of one takeaway from all this is that, you might be attractive and you might be seductive, but it's not for everyone. It's going to be for a certain subset of people who are into that type of seduction. The next seducer is the coquette. And I actually feel bad for people if this is the type of person that you're attracted to. It's almost that like hot and cold push and pull. I think it's a very toxic dynamic. It almost sounds like the anxious avoidant or the fearful avoidant attachment style. It's a person who leans in and kind of hooks you, and then as soon as you're interested, they might withdraw. And then if you're an anxious person, like if you have an anxious attachment, you will almost chase them. And so it's this kind of lean in, lean out, push, pull. It's almost like they kind of bait people. They bait with these promises of love or romance or power or material wealth. And it's like they kind of are baiting people with this. And then when this person finally becomes interested and leans in, they pull back. It's like dangling things in front of people is what this feels like to me. It's a person who's very confident. They clearly hold all the cards, and they have this victim that kind of just, melts into shambles in the presence of this coquette. But I think a key with the coquette is they never really deliver on those promises. Being attracted to a coquette is no fun. And it's sort of part of why I'm talking about this, right? Because if you are attracted to the coquette, if there's something about that excites you, it's probably something that you need to work on, to be honest. So the next type of seducer is the charmer. And this is the type of person who's kind of that expert with words and expert at people. So they lean in and they give you attention and they find out your worries and they support you and they kind of lift you up. And it's like all this very focused attention. And so they will often deflect attention away from themselves and they put it all on you. It's like this spotlight. So they will find and understand your wants, desires, and they'll support you in that. So a good charmer will never argue. They'll never fight. It's the type of person who smooths conflict. Let's say you get elevated. They will smooth it. They will speak into your insecurities. They will kind of take away your reason to fight. So a lot of times with charmers, it's like this, it's a very pleasurable person to be around, and they kind of master pleasure and give it to you. So the thing about charmers is I think that people get kind of addicted to them. And I actually know one person that I feel like is a charmer, but I don't think he really knows that he's doing it. And maybe sometimes women in particular, they kind of get a little bit addicted to it and they like it. They like to get this taste of a person who can really speak into them. And then they sometimes think that he wants more than he really wants. And, and then they can be upset. So unlike the coquette, I think the charmer actually follows up their promises with action. So they are a very actionable type. So one thing about the charmer is it's often not super sexual. The charmer often doesn't really have sex with their victim because having sex, it's like it's almost like the charmer runs on this sort of sexual tension, and that kind of charges the dynamic. And if they actually end up having sex with a person, it kind of removes that sexual tension, right? So that's why the charmer isn't really about sex at all. It's about living in that tension and never really delivering on the sexual side of it. So the next seducer is called the charismatic. And this one is more targeted towards groups of people rather than individual types of people. It's a person who kind of radiates this confidence. It's almost like there's this light inside of them. And it's very attractive to be around a very charismatic person. So it's almost like they have this energy and this intensity inside of them. And when they stand up and speak, people listen. It's very nice to listen to a very charismatic speaker. And a lot of people just feel better when they're close to one of these charismatic individuals. It's almost like there's this feeling like they got a plan, they're moving forward. So a politician, for example, is generally pretty charismatic. Like they can kind of mesmerize a crowd and convince them and make them feel like, we're all in this together and moving in this direction. Kind of the ultimate charismatic seducer. Like a lot of times people can almost elevate them to like saint-like status, like gurus and things like that. So I have this one friend, and definitely this charismatic type. Like he can run organizations, charities, businesses, like it's nothing, right? Like for myself, I actually find it quite hard to run a business with a lot of employees and moving parts and manage all these people. To him, it's effortless. It's amazing. So the last type of seducer is the star. And this is this character who is like almost like a celebrity. It's like celebrities are probably stars. It's like this person who stands out. It's like this type of energy that makes us want to watch them. They might have this kind of electric presence. It's like a dreamlike quality to a lot of these people. But at the same time, it's fairly vague, right? It's not very specific. It's interesting, like with stars, it's not the type of person that would probably start talking about politics, for example. And as soon as they do, it's almost like they would like lose that star-like quality. Instead, it's almost like this dreamlike persona that exists. So as a takeaway for myself, one thing that I noticed about all these different types of seducers is they all run on confidence. If you go back through that list, in order to be those different types, you have to be confident. And it's not that you can't have any insecurity and be seductive. So some of the most seductive people I know obviously have insecurities, but it's almost like they're able to put that aside for a moment and then radiate this confidence. And then oftentimes people are confused or even surprised when it's like, oh, you have body insecurities? I'm going to use my partner Lexi as an example. So, she is like a model slash photographer. So she takes a lot of photos of herself. She does a lot of women's intimate portraiture, is what she likes to call it. It's kind of like that boudoir inspired photography. And there's something about her when she takes a photo. She radiates this energy. She radiates confidence in her photos. And people are often a little bit surprised to find out that, she has body insecurities just like anybody else. But there's something about her that she is able to put those aside for a moment. And then kind of almost as a side effect, it kind of radiates this confidence. Like if you take the charismatic person, they stand up in front of a crowd and can like mesmerize a crowd. There's a confidence in that. You take somebody like the natural, which kind of has this innocent, childlike quality. Well, children often don't have the same insecurities that we do as adults. They kind of just live freely and do what they want and say what they say. There's a confidence in that that's very attractive. You look at the charmer and they talk to people and they never get angry. They don't argue. They're not sensitive. Like, oh, that bothered me what you said. They don't. Oftentimes it's that insecurity inside of us that might cause us to overreact or get upset when somebody maybe makes a joke that's a little too close to home, So one thing that I've kind of wondered is it possible to pretend you have confidence? It's actually something I tell my daughter. She's often, a little bit insecure. And I tell her, well, how would you react or how would you act if you were confident? How would you walk into the room if you were confident? And then she kind of thinks about it and says, oh, well, maybe I would, stand up taller. I'm like, well, then stand up taller. So I kind of wonder if you can you're not faking confidence because then it's not authentic. But can you do the things that a confident person would do is something that I ask for myself. So an anti-seducer, they can never suppress their insecurities. They can't fake it till you make it. They can't walk into a room and act confident. The insecurity rules them. So another thing that seducers do is give that individualized attention. That's why it's so seductive. It's like, look at this person giving me all this attention. I like this. Anti-seducers do the opposite. They don't give individualized attention. They might just treat you like crap instead. The anti-seducers are self-absorbed. They're just too worried about their own problems. They're worried about their own insecurities. They cannot for a second shut that off and turn towards you. They are not self-aware. They can't tell when they're imposing. They can't tell when they're talking too much, for example. They can't tell when they're staying too late and like people are starting to get a little uncomfortable. There's a lack of empathy, I think, involved. There's a self-awareness, but also, they're unaware of other people's needs and comfort. The thing about seduction is there's a subtlety to it, right? It's about reading people, reading the room. The anti-seducers don't have that subtlety. They can't pick up on these little intricacies that you can now, work your magic. And so what Robert Greene says in the book is all of us have a few of these qualities. And so it's up to us to, find these and root them out and basically get them out of our personalities, or at least work on it to kind of reduce it. Because half the thing is you want to be seductive, right? But the other thing is you don't want to be anti-seductive, which actually repels people away. So he mentions a few different personas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them. So the first one is the brute. And this is a person who's only concerned with their own pleasure. They're impatient. They are egotistical. But, under the surface, it's like there's this gnawing sense of they're just not good enough. It's like they're worried that they're inferior. And if you trigger this in them, that's when they kind of overreact and blow up. Another type of anti-seducer is the suffocator. And this is a person who kind of like gloms onto you. It's like they might love you more than they should. Like they love you even before you know who they are, for example. And so there's this feeling like, well, you don't really know me. How can you love me? So inside the suffocator is this deep well of need that just can't be filled. Real love takes time to develop, but they try to rush it. And they will then cling to you until you're kind of just like suffocated. And then you end up pulling back to kind of get away from this suffocating person. And then at that point, they will just like smother you in guilt instead. So Robert Greene says that a subtype of this one is the doormat. And this is a person who's kind of suffocating you, but it's almost like they don't have their own identity. So instead, they just kind of adopt yours. They like whatever you like. They want whatever you want. It's like they don't offer any pushback. And it almost starts to feel like, am I just talking to myself? But there's this lack of depth, right, with a doormat. And it's almost like you want a person who has some ideas, right? So yeah. Very anti-seductive. So the next one is the moralizer. And this is very common, especially with keyboard warriors on social media. So the moralizers are very rigid. They have very strong morals and they're kind of doing all this virtue signaling, right? And they want to change you and make you more like them, adopt their beliefs, adopt their values. And the way that they sort of impose themselves on people is through judgment and trying to make you feel like a bad person so that then you will do their bidding or take on their cause or adopt their beliefs or their values. It's all kind of rooted in control, I think. These types of people, they want to control other people. They want to control their ideas. And I think they have this kind of inability to just enjoy life and adapt to new ideas. It's the difference between that person who might be that like fundamentalist Christian is sort of judging everybody around them, telling them they're all going to hell. And then the person who might be a follower of Jesus, who might exhibit love and non-judgment. These are two examples of Christians, but one is kind of that anti-seducer. They're not doing anybody any favors, certainly not Jesus. So the next anti-seducer is called the tightwad. And this is a person who is just very kind of stingy. Like they don't spend their money. They're not very generous. They don't like to share. One thing Robert Greene says is a person who is stingy with their money is often not very giving in other ways in their lives. And so on the flip side, one thing that is very seductive actually is a very generous person, a person who is generous with their time, generous with their money. And I know one person in particular in my life who is like that. He puts on these amazing events and parties for people, and he cooks them food and it brings all this stuff in and spends all this money. And it's this very generous and very seductive. So the next anti-seducer is the bumbler. This is the person who is just so self-absorbed, so insecure, so worried about themselves, worried about how they look, worried about how they sound, that they almost can't even function because they start to talk and they just get inside their head and they start to bumble. So, the opposite of this would be the charismatic or the charmer is a person who is good with their words. There's this confidence that comes out of them and they're able to express themselves. Instead, the bumbler has trouble expressing themselves and trips over their words and sort of gets caught in their insecurities and can't escape it. So the windbag is another one, kind of self-explanatory. It's a person who just talks too much rather than ask other people questions and get them talking and do that kind of seductive process of making other people the center of attention. They kind of try to take the attention and put it on themselves, and it's anti-seductive. So another anti-seducer is the reactor. And this is a person who's just far too sensitive. It's almost like you can't even really talk to this person because at some point they will find something wrong with something you said that is obviously some kind of insult to them. And then they will react. They'll overreact. Often these people complain a lot. And complaining is very anti-seductive. So the thing about this type is they're just not able to laugh at themselves. Right? I think we should all be able to laugh at ourselves now and then, maybe enjoy a little joke that somebody might make. But these people, like really, you couldn't make a joke to them that involved maybe an element of their character or something like that. They wouldn't take that well. And, they would overreact. The last anti-seducer he talks about is the vulgarian. So this is a person who's just kind of vulgar. Maybe, not vulgar in a creative way, though. It's just like a person that maybe is very impulsive. Maybe they're just dressed really sloppy. Maybe you take them out in public and they just say inappropriate things. Maybe they just, like you go to somewhere like for a nice dinner and they just swear too loud and it bothers people. And it's like this sort of vulgar, rough persona. It's kind of the opposite of being refined and classy, which is kind of a seductive trait. So these types of people often don't really have a sense of timing. They don't know what's appropriate. And instead, they just kind of, stomp through life, I guess. So if I had to look at these anti-seducers and kind of analyze myself, which of these traps do I kind of fall in? I feel like I could probably be more generous. Robert Greene has this thing in the book where he says, most people are cheaper than they think. I've wondered, how could I be more generous? Yeah, I don't think that I'm like the full reactor, but, maybe in the past, maybe I'm a little sensitive at times. Maybe that is based on some insecurities. It's funny, like I'm sure you've seen on TV, like comedians will roast somebody. Like, could I handle that? I think that, I don't know. I don't know if I could. Like, I don't know if I'd want to be roasted. And maybe that tells you something, right? Maybe I'm not secure enough. Maybe if I was completely secure, I could sit there and listen to a whole bunch of jokes that roast me. I'm not sure. And the moralizer is interesting. There's probably elements of that in my personality where I get these like strong ideas sometimes, these strong ideals, and I try to tell other people about them, and then maybe it's not taken well. It's kind of a fine line, though. It's funny, right? Like, what if you do have strong values? What if you are trying to advocate for something? How do you do that without kind of going down the road of this anti-seductive quality? Because, I would imagine if you're trying to build a movement, let's say, you want to be seductive in order to attract people to you. So how do you, move that cause forward while not being anti-seductive? And in a lot of ways, I think this one idea gives me a little bit of comfort. Whichever of these seducers that I most relate to, the reality is, even if I was the best seducer on the planet of that type, there will still be lots of people who don't find me seductive, who aren't attracted to me because they're looking for something completely different. And I think that's a great takeaway for all of us. And something that actually I've been working on with my daughter is that not everyone will like you, and not everyone should like you. If you kind of embrace a few of these seducers, you'll have a lot of people that really like that, but maybe some people who don't, right? Like a person who's really attractive to that childlike natural energy might not like that dark, kind of mysterious, seductive energy of the siren. They might find that intimidating. They might find that, I don't know, like scary. So just something to keep in mind. We all have our unique abilities. And the reality is there is somebody out there for you, and not everybody is for you. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thanks so much. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear, which seducer type do you think you are? And which seducer do you think you're most attracted to? So as always, I hope you got something out of this. I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you have a great day. See ya.